Would you be seated? Prone to wonder, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, O take and seal it. Seal it for thy courts above. I never know whether to feel reassured or frustrated when we hear in our scriptures stories of the human condition and human responses to God that happened thousands and thousands of years ago and still seems to be echoing today. On the one hand, it seems as though we would have figured some things out by now. And on the other, God's steadfast faithfulness, mercy, and love sustain and guide and hold us now, as they always have and will, for which I know we are grateful. But we should have figured something out by now. Truths like God's steadfast presence and love in our lives, and yet are consistently losing sight of just those things, our need to depend on nothing short of this, and not our own plans and proclivities, and yet there we go again. Our addiction to power and might as the metrics of strength and success, only to follow a God who laid it all down for the sake of the life of the world. We become rightly convinced that we should let go of our best ideas and our own tendencies that we might more fully follow God's, and so we set ourselves straight again, only to fall off the good and loving path we have restarted again, only to find ourselves back in a familiar place of seeking God and discovering that God yet again hasn't left us alone. Rinse, wash, repeat. It's a remarkable witness to the enduring truth of the human condition that we are indeed prone to wander, prone to leave the God we love, and it is a compelling truth that this pattern bears witness to. God's grace and mercy hasn't failed yet. Thanks be to God. Our Book of Common Prayer captures some of this pattern in one of our prayers at communion at the Eucharist. At St. Paul's, we've just finished a season of using this prayer, Prayer D, in the Easter season, so these words might sound familiar to some of you. The Celebrant prays, "When our disobedience took us far from you, you did not abandon us to the power of death. In your mercy, you came to our help so that in seeking you, we might find you. Again and again, you called us into covenant with you, and through the prophets, you taught us to hope for salvation." Again and again. Again and again, we find ourselves far from God, falling into the trappings and temptations of powers that lead to death. Breaking our own end of the bargain we have made with God, and again, God meets us not in rejection, but with help, in order that we might find God again. With not abandonment, but presence, and ultimately with hope that we might find a salvation that frees us from the power of sin. The portion of Hosea's prophecy that we hear today describes human beings doing seemingly what human beings have done to that point over and over, and what we will continue to do. War is raging or about to rage. One group is seeking to subject another to their will. Destruction and chaos are in the air. The people have repeated their patterns of being faithful for a time and then returning to running things their own ways. They have decided again that violence-based gain, that capturing another group of humans in exile, that fear and confusion and suspicion are the ways that power should be enacted, even while they say they want to do otherwise. Of course, God is no fool. And so God knows the fickleness of human nature when God says to them, "Your love is like a morning cloud, like the dew that goes away early." God knows that they might seem like a freshly watered, fully nourished, sustainably thriving garden. They might even think of themselves in much the same way. But they are not. There are times when they have lived their lives in just this way, going the good and life-giving ways that God has called them, but God has seen enough to know that it won't endure. You see, when God offers that analysis of the human condition, it comes on the heels of God telling the people, I will return again to my place until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face. Enough is going on that God is going to let them figure it out, or at least try to figure out, that they not be the ones in charge, that maybe their plans aren't all that great. The people seem to hear this, and some of what we read in Hosea today is a sort of ancient religious practice language of saying, we need to get it together. We need to return to the practices of our faith, to the right following of the rules, to the correct ways of enacting these rituals and rites, and they seem with no reason to assume anything but genuine faith in their hearts, to know that God is the only one who will endure, that God really is meant to be the center of all things, even if they forget it again and again. Let us press on to know the Lord, they say. His appearing is as sure as the dawn. He will come to us like the showers, like the spring rains that water the earth. It seems that in the time of Hosea, human beings, the human condition could be described like evaporating vapor, like morning dew that would be dry by midday. And God's appearing would be as predictable and dependable as the rising sun. God's promise of life as nourishing as the spring rains that water the earth and bring forth life. And it seems that in the time of Hosea, the people are more likely to forget the one who is constant and enduring, who is steadfast and faithful, who brings forth the very life they seek and who nourishes their whole lives instead of trusting in a fleeting vapor of human strength, in an illusion of human control, in a power that might have been gained through might and force and which will crumble and fade and never endure. They know the way to go, and yet they do otherwise. Can you believe those people? I'm so grateful we aren't like them. Thankfully, they got it all figured out for us. In this portion of Hosea's prophecy, everyone knows there's a problem with this dynamic. That's actually not the issue. No one is unaware that it won't work. But just how the people of God will turn their faces back to God, just how they will return to God, needs to be made a bit more clear. The remarkable thing of it all is that God is going to let them try to do what they think God wants. Right religious practice, sacrifices in the correct way, the right people doing the right things. God is going to give them more and more chances to get it together, even while God also knows that they cannot and will not. God knows they won't, and God knows about that whole dew on the morning grass, fickle human nature thing, and so again and again and again, God shows them and us that the only thing that actually endures, the only thing that is steadfast, is God. In our needs to control and in our needs to run our own plans until they fail, God draws closer. God knows, even when we do not, that the chasing after our own best ideas for our lives leads only to the end of our rope. And gratefully, God is there. But we need not wait until we get there to turn to God to hold our lives. While crying out to God in moments of desperation is good and right, let us instead be a people who turn our lives, our souls and bodies, more and more to God in every moment, not just the desperate ones when we have forgotten again that the morning dew does dry up, and we have forgotten that the steadfast love of God nourishes us more than we could ask or imagine. God is going to show up for God's people through it all, there is no question, and God only asks of them and us one thing. Now, this is not a prerequisite to compel God's presence in our lives, but rather a recipe, a way of life for us that causes us to center our lives in God, not in ourselves. I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice. The knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings, or said slightly differently when Jesus quotes this same Hosea passage and what we hear him say today, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And so we let go of your need to do the right thing, to make it about you, to fix and control and get all in right order, and rest in the truth that all of that will fail when it depends on us. And what awaits us in those moments of failure is not shame or rejection, but an eternal and unending river of mercy. Mercy is the very thing, the very substance of God that reminds us that though we may deserve otherwise, God's embrace is never cut off, God's face is never hidden, God's presence is by our side. Again and again, we turn to go another way, and again, God shows up. The remedy for the fickle human condition, drying like the morning dew, is the mercy of God, abundant, unending, and offered without condition. There is no Christianity without mercy, Pope Francis once said. God's mercy is our liberation and our happiness. We live of mercy, and we cannot afford to be without mercy. It is the air we breathe. We are too poor to set any conditions. Mercy is what calls the tax collector and what causes Jesus to eat with him. Mercy is what brings life for the daughter of the leader of the synagogue. Mercy is what restored to relationship and wholeness the suffering woman. Mercy is our good news today. Mercy is at the heart of God's own nature. It is found in the again and again of our turning away from God, and in the again and again of God's embrace when we turn back. For we are the same as Hosea's people. We are the same as all people for all time, that ought to be a freeing truth, as we remember that we are not called to perfection, but instead to remembering God's unending mercy carrying us in each moment of our lives. After all, Jesus calls the sinners, not the righteous, trusting that those sinners might know that they are only ever set back into this right way with God through God's unending mercy alone. Trusting that it is those same sinners who will let their lives be so transformed by this mercy that they will enact it in their own lives with full awareness that they are not the only ones that stand in the need of this promise. May we never forget to turn back to God's merciful embrace, and may such a way of life, merciful and loving as God has been to us beyond measure and comprehension, be yours and mine this day.